Everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, the most common human incidents, a forensicator's tale. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Matt Bromley, SANS up-and-coming instructor, and Lance Spitzner of SANS Securing the Human. If during the webcast you have any questions for Matt or Lance, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Lance.
All right, thanks Carol. And folks, thanks so much for joining us for today's webcast. As Carol mentioned, my name is Lance Spitzner, and I would like to introduce you to this new series of webcasts, what we call Bringing in the Expert. In this new series from Securing the Human, what we're doing is this. At SANS Securing the Human, our job is to develop the best security awareness content in the world. And to do that, we work with a tremendous number of SANS instructors, some of the most trusted security professionals in the world. It's an amazing resource, and we've been using this resource for years. It recently dawned on me that wouldn't it be great to get these amazing professionals on webcasts to not only share information with us, but information with you. So today's webcast with Matt is the first of that new series of webcasts. The reason I asked Matt to join us is this. He is part of the DFIR side of the House of SANS. For the security awareness folks, DFIR stands for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. These are the individuals who are trained to clean up messes after an organization has been hacked or compromised. And what's great is they have years and years of hands-on experience and have seen what are the most common causes for these incidents. And almost any forensics or incident response person is going to tell you it's human-driven. So for those of us from the security awareness world, one of our biggest challenges is knowing what human risks to focus on. So Matt's going to share with us what he's seen working for years in this field. Now what's interesting is he's not only going to share with us the causes for the human incidents, how the bad guys got in, but some of the human mistakes organizations make responding to those incidents. So what's great for the security awareness folks out there is we're not only going to learn about human prevention, the human firewall, but the response side, how we can develop the human sensor. And for folks out there coming from the forensic side, you're going to hear from one of the best once again, but on the human element. And as I mentioned, we're going to be doing these Bringing the Expert webcasts once a month, every month. If you want to learn more about when they're coming up, just go to the URL there for /events for November. We're very excited to have Dave Shackelfeld talk about social engineering, how the pen testers actually get in. So we're going to be talking from the offensive side. But let's go ahead and hand it over to Matt. Matt is now going to tell us all about his experiences when it comes to cleaning up the mess. All right, Matt, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Lance, and thanks for that introduction. It would be hard for me to describe how much excitement. It probably rivals Lance's right now about how excited I am about this webcast series. I've been fortunate enough to do some work with the Secure the Human program, and it's absolutely amazing the knowledge that we're compiling, that we're bringing together, and that Lance has overseen as we deliver to help your organization get smarter and help your organization become more aware and more information security conscious. A brief introduction about myself, as mentioned earlier by Carol and Lance. I'm an up-and-coming SANS instructor within the DFIR track, the Digital Forensic and Incident Response track. You're most likely going to hear me refer to that as DFIR as we go through the webcast, just for clarification. I'm also a SANS analyst and also have done some work with the Secure the Human program. I'm also currently a senior incident response consultant with a major international incident response firm. But the most important part is that it's not about where I am now. It's the experience that I've had in the different companies I've worked with in the past. And I've done everything from a small 1-2 shop all the way up to multinational conglomerates. And without spending too much time, my passions really lie in open source tools and also digital forensics. But I'm really excited to take a moment and talk more about the human side of things. It's really funny. I actually heard a very, very interesting quote. It was in a comedy movie that it's an older one that I saw the other day, and someone said, you have to remember that attackers aren't bad guys, that's what they do. There's actually humans that are doing these things. And I found that quote really, really interesting, and I thought, well, I take a look at our information security programs as well, and you know, our organizations aren't resilient blue teams. That is what we do. We are humans, first and foremost. And it's important to focus on how the human element is extremely important to the information security program. And I think Lance and team have done a very good job. So with that, let's take a moment and focus a little bit on cyber today. And yes, I want you to read that with the different quotes, doing 2 fingers on either side of cyber today. How do things look today? It's a very interesting world. The world right now of cyber, quote unquote, is full of very complex technologies. We've got things like next generation firewalls, very, very, very advanced capable endpoint agents. Everyone's offering machine learning now. Let the machines do the learning for you. Let the machines figure out where everything is. And we've also got anomaly detection with advanced enterprise heuristics. Baseline your environment. What does normal look like? What does abnormal look like? I'm sure some of these sound like emails you may have gotten recently. It almost feels like we can just let the machines run the show. If I were to take a look at some of the most recent conferences and vendor shows that I've been to, I would think to myself, wow, number one, we're really close to Skynet. Number two, these machines are really, really capable. They can do a lot of stuff for us. So then I have to ask myself the question, why are these attackers still successful? Are they still successful? Without a doubt. Open any newspaper almost any day of the week, and there's proof that cyber attacks are still winning. So it's not necessarily to recommend avoiding advanced technology, because without a doubt, at a very minimum, it makes our teams more stronger. But what I think the core focus of this is, no matter how advanced you make the machine, it still has to have a human interacting with it. You can't take away the human element, the human part of this. And that's what I want to take a chance with Lance today to focus on, is make sure we discuss the human side of this, how the human's important, how the human affects this. Humans are oftentimes the first and last element of defense. Now follow me through this with just a moment. That doesn't mean humans are the only element of defense. That means humans are very often sitting at both the entry and exit vectors for our attackers as well. And that gives us as humans a very rare opportunity to have multiple points of information security awareness, multiple points of advanced insight into what's going on in our networks, but also more importantly, it gives us the confidence that at some point in time, I do have the ability to catch and or stop this attack, because I usually, as a human, sit at either side. And I think that's one of the core focuses of our Secure the Human program, and again, why I'm so excited about this webcast series. Technology, again, can only do what it's programmed to do. You can have the smartest machine in the world. We could all have Tony Stark's Jarvis inside of our networks, and we could have an extreme advanced AI. It's only as capable as we let it and as we program it to be. And then last but not least, the most important part of this slide, our organizations are made up of humans. We are all a group of humans watching this right now. It would be very, very hard to describe the information security program for a completely robotic organization, because it doesn't exist. So if anything, there's even more of an importance and more of a focus to make sure we are keeping the human aspect of information security at the forefront and make it something that we are focusing on, because it's easily one of the best areas we have to succeed, without a doubt. With that, let's start to jump into some, let's have a little bit of fun. Let's start to jump into some scenarios, start to talk about some stories, start to talk about where the human element has been very, very crucial in the past. And if you're thinking in your mind, where's he going to go with this? What's the first thing? Well, it would be very, very hard to talk about humans and to ignore the concept of spear phishing. Is spear phishing successful? Without a doubt. It is still one of the most successful attack entry vectors. Now, it's not as straightforward as it's successful because everyone's browser is very exploitable. It's not as successful because everyone clicks everything. It's successful because it still works. There's a myriad of reasons why spear phishing still works and why it's still successful and why it's still used so heavily, and that's because it works. And spear phishing is the first vector to a lot of different attacks, and it is the first one that in most cases requires human interaction. Now, we're not going to go through spear phishing education, but we want to talk about a little bit of how spear phishing has been successful and potentially give you a little bit of test as well. Before we go through that, I think it's important. I don't want to fill this presentation with statistics, and we've done our best to avoid quoting a lot of statistics, but I just want to make a note that in Verizon's 2016 report, only 3% of about 636,000 emails were flagged as suspicious. 97% success rate. All I need is one click, and all of a sudden I've gone to 100% success rate. The number of fails doesn't matter as long as I get one in. So let's talk a little bit about, I don't want to say one of my favorite spear phishing campaigns, because that is unfortunately a bit of a paradox. It's hard to say something that has done so much damage is your favorite, but it's one that I'd like to test our webcast attendees on and also talk about from a story perspective as well. I've run into this particular one, I want to say about 36 times thus far within my career, and the 36 instances I've run into have been at very best a drop in a very, very, very large ocean. And it's called the business email scam. It should become as no surprise to a lot of our attendees and to a lot of businesses. This has actually been around for a little bit, and it's been very, very well documented and talked about. Key ingredients to this particular scam: smaller businesses. Small does not mean single storefront. Smaller means the average target or the most common target is not in your Fortune 50. That doesn't mean Fortune 50 is excluded. That means that Fortune 50 is not the primary target in this case, for obvious reasons. Some of these large organizations, they've got extremely well and advanced programs in place, and our attackers are looking to get around those. Important consideration from the human side as well. Think about our attacker. I want to go after a chain in the link that I have a potential chance of actually getting through. Big businesses fallen victim, but again, smaller businesses are what to go after. The other ingredients you need are are incorrect domain. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. You need a CEO name and a CFO name. Now, if you're watching this from an InfoSec or from a from your organization, think about how easy it would be to get that information. There's probably about 10 different sources you can name without thinking about how easy it would be to get that, and then a random accounting or finance employee. In this case, LinkedIn, easiest way to go. Google actually will index that for you, so you can do very quick searches that way. Once we've got these ingredients, our attacker starts off again with a transposed incorrect domain. Now, I know your eyes are immediately drawn to the two different domains, and you're saying to yourself, there's something wrong here. There's a space. It looks like a space in between the M, I, and C in Microsoft.com. This is actually me playing a trick on you. It's actually two different fonts. The first one is actually M1 Crosoft, whereas the other one is Microsoft.com. There's an issue with this type of transposing. There's an issue with this type of domain, and this is where we focus on the human side of things. Number one, this actually makes sense to the trained eye, aka the people on this webcast, the people in information security conferences, the people who see this data. This makes sense to you. Oh, okay, I understand what transposing is. I know I should be looking for that. I've got services to look for that. Letters for numbers, extra letters, transpose letters. Read that one quickly. Whiskey versus Vavisky. W is another very easily transposed one as well. And then also other domains. InfoSec operators, humans. Your domain sits at a .com, a .net, a .org. Does anyone own the .info, the .biz, the .co, the .etsy? There's so many top-level domains these days, I lose track of keeping the number of them, but you've got to watch out for all of those. Because imagine you're a human, not inside of InfoSec, and an email comes from your organization's name, .info or .biz. Well, I read in the newspaper that .info was made available about 6 months ago. It would make sense to me that my organization would register .info. Therefore, I can most likely trust this email. That is an honest thought process that I have seen some information security departments go through. I have seen some departments inside of organizations go through the process of, yes, this makes sense to me. Again, your attackers are banking on the human side of this. They are banking on the human interaction. They are not afraid of it. Again, information security professionals, this may sound fairly rehearsed. This may sound fairly normal. This may make sense. Your team of stakeholders, your other departments who don't do this for a living, or your other departments who may not have much exposure, they are not trained eyes. So from a human perspective, I can't rely on the fact that everyone looks at something the exact same way I do. I've got to help them get to the point where they can see it the way I do, and that's how we help make the human element a little more successful. Let's take this same example. This is actually this is a doctored email, but this is actually very representative of an email that was from a case I worked a few years ago. A little side story, this case, believe me, it does get better. This case actually made it all the way up to the FBI. The FBI is very involved with this global business email scam going on, and there was actually an arrest made out of this case, and it was actually in Dallas, which is where I live. So it was nice to kind of see things come home and come to fruition. However, again, this campaign is still going on, still very successful. So I've given you about a minute as I've been talking to look through this email and see if you can find the differences. Let's make it a little pop quiz. Let's see what's happened. Number one, this is not an actual forward. This was hand-typed by the attacker. It's very, very easy. If anyone can think, as soon as I showed you that, if you can take a look and think through all the forwards and all the replies you get in your inbox, subconsciously you know exactly what that format looks like. Not only do you know what it looks like in your inbox, you know what it looks like on your phone, you know what it looks like in your tablet, you know what it looks like in different formats. Attackers are banking on that. They are banking on you knowing what a forward looks like, because from the human side, it automatically develops a level of trust, and that's what our attackers rely on. They rely on you immediately trusting this, because it gets them the first step in the way. Step two, did anyone notice the domain transposition? My organization, acmeabc.com. A quick glance at that email, especially given the time of day. Friday at 4:56 p.m., I get an email from Jane, who's my CFO, and it looks like it's a forward from Jim, who's our CEO. I don't want to argue with them. I don't want to be in a position where I'm having to call someone at this time of the afternoon. I know Jane left a little while ago. This is something I should most likely respond to. From the human side, that is very, very accurate description of where our attackers are banking on your organization being at. They are banking on you being at a point where no one wants to argue with the contents of the email. Now, there's a couple important considerations about this email as well. Again, it usually arrives at an opportune time. Late afternoon, in my experience with the different cases I've worked, late afternoon is a very popular one. Think in your head as a human when your organization most likely does not want to receive emails like this. Right before a holiday is another good one, Fridays. Also financially related dates as well, quarter closings, year-end dates. Believe me, your attackers are looking at your financial documents, and they are seeing when your business is most likely going to be busiest, and they are using those times to their advantage. So from a human point of view, it's a very tough, and InfoSec professionals, I feel your pain. I know we are asking people to be most alert when they are most stressed out. It's a very, very tough combination to ask of our fellow humans. The emails often express extreme importance for a transaction to occur immediately. Again, banking on our humans being stressed, being busy. Please let this happen ASAP. And then it's also made to look like management is delegating the task. This is another human assumption that our attackers are taking advantage of. Is it unusual for a manager to delegate to another manager, or for a CEO to delegate to a CFO to then delegate to an accountant or to a comptroller, or from a CFO to a VP down to the head of accounting or the head of finance? No, it's not irregular at all. It's actually a chain that makes sense in order for most businesses to work. Again, taking advantage of what humans expect to see. what we're going after. So from a human point of view, it's a lot of different opportunities for our attackers to take a look and find ways to exploit what we expect to see, what we look for in an email. They also take advantage of a lot of spear phishing training as well. Remember, spear phishing, hover over links. Take a look and make sure it's not pointing somewhere malicious. Our attacker didn't provide any links. They actually provided what looked like a business request in an email. Another consideration as well, sent to our accounting and finance departments. I've talked on that one, but the most important takeaway from this particular story, from this particular case study, is that this is not the InfoSec department. A lot of red teamers will tell you that they go after some of the privileged IT members because they want to get account credentials. They want to find a way to break into the environment. Your accounting and finance team is not ordinarily the first line of defense. However, for this particular scam, some of the organizations that I've worked for, our training has ended up turning into, don't think of InfoSec as the only place where you need the most training. Don't think of InfoSec as the only place where you need things such as two-factor. And notice I didn't say two-factor authentication. I said two-factor for the purposes of doing their business. A very, very good example of where else two-factor is relevant for humans is in financial transaction processing. Two-factor. Very, very good example of this. A lot of businesses require 2 signatures on a check. Prevents an organization from falling into a spot where checks are being cashed that were not legitimately written by the business owners. More importantly, though, two-factor from our financial prevents you from having a second pair of eyes on different information. One of the ways that we've addressed this, again, is with user education. For my InfoSec professionals on the phone, we can't expect everyone to see through the same lens that we do. This particular case study has grossed somewhere in the vicinity of over $3 billion in the past 7 years. In the past 5 years, pardon me. $3 billion in the past 5 years due to some of these errors. We've got to make sure that we take a look at thinking about all of our departments as different front lines of detection and making sure they're all on board. Encourage your communication about suspicious emails is also how we've helped resolve this problem as well. Put your hand up. I like to think of the old classroom model. Putting your hand up. Teacher, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand what's going on. Extend that to a modern day business organization. It's okay to say this doesn't make sense. Believe me, if you have to put 2 things on the side of a coin, and one side of the coin is $1 million accidentally or fraudulently being transmitted out of the organization, and you having to call your CEO at 5:15 on a Friday, trust me, they'd rather get the call on a Friday every single time. Don't let that one fall victim. And then utilize technology if possible to fill some of the gaps. But the reason I bring up this particular case study, and I like to share this story, is I'll ask you the really quick question: would technology have caught the business email scam? No. It is not a piece of malware. It is not a malicious link. If anything, it is an email that is sent from a different domain, and that's really one of the only linchpins that technology is able to hook onto, is this did not come from a trusted source. And that's where we can utilize technology to help make our life and make the life of our different organizations or our different departments internally a little bit easier.
Hey, Matt.
Let's move on.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump right in there, too. And these type of attacks, they don't have to use a different domain. They can also use the same domain. So, for example, at SANS, we got hit with an email just like this a couple of weeks ago, where the from email was actually our real email address, our real domain. But what they had changed was the reply to. So if somebody replied to the email, then they would be replying to a different email, something different, hard to notice. So even if you're filtering based on domains, there's ways around.
Exactly. Very, very, very good point, Lance. And that definitely speaks to the different capabilities that our attacker have. And I couldn't agree with you more. And that's where we get to a case where, again, training our humans, working with our humans to look at the multiple parts of the email, or look at your technology. Does the from and the reply equal the same thing? Do they match up? Because there is no reason legitimately to have a mismatch on that one. But no, very good point, Lance. Thanks for bringing that up. That's actually an important consideration as well. And I would just offer this last little piece of advice about these email scams and these different types of attacks, especially for the human side of things. Utilize that technology when you can. Look for those mismatches when you can. Look for those discrepancies when you can. But again, don't forget the final and the first line is going to be the recipient of that email, and that's the human that we get to focus on. Okay, moving on. One of the other common human things that I see as well is actually attack misestimating. We're going to talk about two different types of misestimating. The first one is going to be an attack misestimating. Now, in simplest form, attack misestimating is a breach has been discovered. An organization has found evidence that something has happened. Remember, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper approach to this one, but we're going to focus on the human. A breach has been discovered. They've also discovered multiple phases of the attacker lifecycle. I'm not going to go through the deeper side of things. We want to keep it with the human. But the overall concept here is that an attacker has not been in the network for a minute or an hour. They've been in the network for a while. They've been moving around. They've been looking at different types of data. And then there's also a potential of data leaving. This is the scariest part of any breach, is when you see evidence of this type of data happening, this type of transaction of data leaving the environment. Unfortunately, this is usually when the media gets involved or blog posts go up about what's happened. Attack misestimation, the organization is still in denial about the breach, or worse, has misestimated the attacker, and this falls on our humans, on our incident response teams inside of these different organizations. There's a few reasons of why I've seen attack misestimation in my time. Now, hopefully none of these sound familiar, but if they do, we've definitely got something to think about. Number one, attack misestimation. My team has this covered. We'll talk a little bit about, in the case study, about how my team has this covered is actually sometimes an admittance that you're not aware of how capable the attacker is. And that's not a slight to your team. Not every organization can be expected to stop 100% of every single attacker. It's okay to admit, I haven't seen this before. We might need to ask for some help. We might need to get a second opinion. One of the other reasons I see for attack misestimation, I've spoken with some C-suites, with some VPs who take one look at the evidence and say, we don't have anything worth stealing. There was a very famous commercial breach that happened a few years ago, and one of the members of the C-suite was quoted as saying, what are they coming here for? All we've got is hammers. There's a very good misestimation as to this. There's no way this could happen. There's nothing here that anyone would actually want. We also see a lot of leaning on, I call this resting on your technology laurels. We see someone saying, I spent $1 million, I spent 10, I spent 20, I spent 100 million last year on different types of technology. I don't believe that this has happened. You must be interpreting things wrong. There's no way this attack actually happened because I have XYZ in place. We've already spent a little bit of time talking about no matter what XYZ technology you have in place, you have to remember it was put there, is most likely watched by, and is managed by a human. So a human is not necessarily the reason the attack happened, but our device is not running in autonomous block everything mode, because that would suffer, that would make our organization suffer. And then one of the worst human attack misestimations I see, and I see this unfortunately more frequently than not, is no way. There's no way this happened. This is not possible. My network is set up in such a way that this could not have happened. Unfortunately, when you're looking evidence in the face of someone crossing the road, the argument to make is not there's no way they could have crossed the road because I put a barrier up there. It's not a question as to whether or not they crossed. They're already on the other side. So from a human point of view, use your evidence to tell you where you're at. Use what your teams are telling you. Use what your other humans are telling you about the environment to know where you're at in this case. A good case study in this one, I spent some time, a few months actually, working once with a manufacturing industry. They were a very large global manufacturing firm, billions in revenue. Let me know when this sounds familiar. Billion-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company. Their InfoSec team for the entire world, 3 people. 3 people to hold this one down. The event, this company had multiple SIM alerts. And when I say multiple, we're in the dozens of thousands of alerts detailing signs of lateral movement. For my non-deeper folks, lateral movement, movement from host to host within the environment. An assumption that someone is already inside and they're moving from point B to point C, not point A to point B. They have already compromised point A. We're seeing movement between multiple workstations using a specific tool built for the purposes of lateral movement. This tool was not used legitimately within the environment. So the first check, let me go to my other humans. Hey, sysadmins, network admins, do you legitimately use this tool? No, I do not. That is not something that is approved. Therefore, that should not be in our environment. First sign that your attacker may be using features, or maybe using tools that are new to the environment. Good indicator, this is not my normal human. This is potentially a bad human in this case. The response, they were only in our test network. And in our test network, there's nothing worth stealing whatsoever. The reality of this one, though, unfortunately, the detected lateral movement was actually the attackers, a very well-known and well-documented APT group, exfiltrating data out of the test network because the firewall rules were not as strong there. There's a few different human elements to be considered here. Number one, a gross misestimation of the attack. I only see a tiny little piece of the puzzle. I only see a corner piece. Based on this corner piece, this one corner piece, I'm going to make an assumption that the puzzle is only 100 pieces in size. It's very tough to make that assumption. As humans, we can't rely on that assumption being made. We can't misestimate our attackers, especially given the fact that we're seeing data walk out in the environment. How did we solve this one? How did we mitigate it? How did we help the organization and the humans inside of it get better? Number one, don't misestimate any attack. And this is actually an important lesson, especially given today's attack landscape as well. A lot of organizations are being hit with what feels like very run-of-the-mill commodity-style attacks, ransomware. Ransomware is everywhere, exploit kits, all these different types of little insignificant attacks that really, in some case, may cause your business more harm from a slowdown perspective, or your incident response team a ticket overload, rather than actually displaying evidence of an advanced attacker. But don't misestimate. Use those to help your teams get better. If I am constantly getting hit with ransomware via one or two different vectors, those are where I need to focus my humans on. Again, back to our spear phishing concept. If I am continually getting ransomware in the finance department, I need to go to the finance department and I need to work with them and train them and help them get a little more advanced and a little more InfoSec aware so I can help prevent this. Don't look at it as a this will never be solved problem. We have humans at the front line we can work with. Utilize the attack again, determine where your network is vulnerable, patch if you can. This organization was severely underpatched. It's what allowed the attackers to get both in and out. Patching is without a doubt a technology problem that, you guessed it, controlled by humans. Make sure you have an environment where you're keeping your stuff up to date. And in bold, or not bold, but in big red letters here, it's okay to ask when you are outside of your depth. Again, 3 people to guard a multi-billion-dollar organization. It's okay to say to your boss, I think we need to get a second opinion. There's lots of points in life when, as humans, we often ask for second opinions. And it can be as simple as, I don't trust that doctor, let me go see another doctor. I don't like the airfare on this one site, I'm going to go search for it on another site. I think I can get a cheaper car rental if I go to point A, point B. Let me know when this starts to sound really familiar. So why don't we second guess ourselves when we're protecting an organization? Very, very important human concept to think about. Let me get a second opinion on this one. And then most importantly as well, this organization could have actually prevented this attack by doing 2 Google searches. They had the indicators. With 2 very, very quick searches, they could have identified who the threat group was, the types of details that the threat groups have and the level of their capability, and also the type of data that they would be going after as well. So if you're in a place where your InfoSec team has captured information, has captured details, don't misestimate your attacker. Don't think that your network is under control, and don't make assumptions about what the attacker may be doing. Ask for help, look for information that's out there if you can, and utilize that to your advantage. I talked about attack misestimation. Another one is response misestimating as well, and this is actually a very, very common one that we see. And it's tough to describe this one as a consultant. I don't want you to think of me as saying everyone handles response incorrectly. I've actually been in a lot of organizations where a lot of response is done right, but in a few cases, we've got to focus on where our humans went wrong for us. Response misestimating is very similar to attack misestimating, but it's not focused on detection of the attack or understanding what the attacker's doing. It's instead looking at how your organization responds to the fact that something's happened. For my InfoSec folks or my non-InfoSec folks, you can think of this as, how do I respond to something post-media? How do I respond to something post-Krebs? How do I respond to something post-law enforcement notification? It's a lack of understanding the gravity of what a finding actually means, of what has actually happened. Our InfoSec teams, the difference in this case, I've actually seen this happen in organizations where InfoSec teams are very well developed. They're very capable and very alert. They've detected an attack. They may not have found data leaving the network, but they found the attack at a crucial point in time, where they've been able to say, we know that something's going on. We know what type of a threat group it is. We know how bad the situation can actually get. And the organization's response to that is often too little. Sometimes can also be too late, but many times it is both too little and too late. My case study for this one is actually a focus on the hospitality industry. This is actually a client that I've done some work with. It's a mid-sized hospitality client with a handful of folks tasked with network and system administration. Again, I know this is going to speak to some teams out there. We've actually got a pretty well built out team. We've got handfuls of people who know the networks very well. They know the systems very well. You can bounce questions off each other. Not everyone has to consult a spreadsheet to answer a question. The environment is well known. AV logs were discovered, or sorry, antivirus logs discovered evidence of attacker tools being executed on domain controller. The company's response, wipe the domain controller. That's it. This was a gross misestimating of how to respond to an incident because it was potentially a misestimation of what happened. The InfoSec team was begging the organization, the overall parent organization, this is much more severe. We need to actually change passwords. We need to educate folks on defending against the entry vector. And the response from the organization was, you don't need to. You've only got evidence of one compromised host or one compromised host. Wipe that host and move on. Oftentimes, response misestimating is also due to cost estimation as well. How much will it cost for me to wipe one machine versus how much will it cost for me to keep the help desk over the weekend and reset everyone's passwords? Money often wins. The reality of it, though, and the InfoSec team knew this, once the domain has been compromised, once the domain controller has been compromised, the entire domain has been compromised. By misestimating the response, by responding too little too late, the attacker actually remained in the environment for another 6 months and was able to successfully exfiltrate data. And the organization did not get an alert from their internal IR team in 6 months. It was actually a public media notification coupled with a law enforcement notification that came through. Very, very embarrassing point to be in, especially as a C-suite or as a human inside of IT technology management. You don't want to be in a place where someone says to you, data has been exfilled, data has been exfiltrated, your network has been compromised, and your first thought is, that sounds familiar. I think I've actually heard this before. Trust your teams. Trust what they're telling you. We've got another case study in this one as well. It's a large healthcare organization that I did some work with. They had a very capable team. They could actually respond to and detect alerts in minutes. They were very, very, very well done. They had a ransomware installation. 2 years of laptops that spread to file shares. The installation occurred due to outdated third-party software that was controlled by software deployment, and it prevented access to critical files for nearly 5 hours. Now, if anyone who has been listening to this webcast has gone through a ransomware incident, those stats actually aren't that bad. That's not even a full business day. 5 hours, that's an easy, easy day. The response to this one, wipe the laptops. Restore the file shares from backups. That's all we need to do. I talked a little bit earlier about using these opportunities to take a look at how did someone get into my organization? How do I respond to that? They only wiped the laptops and the file shares from backups. No one focused on, unfortunately, the vulnerable third-party software that was the initial vector in the first place. They never issued a patch, and they never utilized their perimeter devices to block traffic. Again, thinking about how our humans responded to the incident. A very capable team, very intelligent, very smart, replaced laptops, got file shares back up, business continuity was restored. However, no one took the next step and thought, how do we respond to this? How do we get better? My firewalls are not going to automate. Yeah, go ahead, Lance.
And I'm going to jump right in too. For all of the security awareness folks listening out there, as Matt's walking through this, he brings up a real good point. We need to be talking to our incident response team. When ransomware like this comes in, we need to ask, well, how did it get in? Who clicked? Things like that. So you can find out, were they trained? If they weren't trained, why weren't they? If they were trained, why did they still fall victim? Do we need to change the training? So as we teach in Management 433, and to quote the infamous Randy Marchini, never let a breach go to waste. So as Matt's walking through these, this is an amazing opportunity to learn what went wrong, do a root cause analysis so we can base how we train in the future and who we train, and also potentially as a lever to get more support for that training. Back to you.
Nah, Lance, that's great. I would have a hard time saying it better myself. And that's exactly what happened to the organization. Don't let a breach go to waste. The results of this breach unfortunately did. And the next day, one of the users, brand new laptop, brand new gold image, back and working as usual, got compromised via the same exact method and the same exact top-level domain. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, did they open the same exact email or visit the same exact site? No. But the important takeaway is they didn't have to, and the attack was still successful. So to quote Lance, to quote Randy, don't let a breach go to waste. Use every opportunity you can, InfoSec practitioners. Even how subtle or insignificant the breach may seem, use that to get your network and defend it a little bit better. Use that to find out where your weaker links may be in your different departments and help that guide your future InfoSec training and your spend as well. Where should we be focused? What resources should I be looking at? Again, understanding the importance of what a finding means is how we help this organization deal with the response to this one. Don't misestimate a breach. Don't misestimate your response. Where in the network? Perimeter versus internal. Different considerations for understanding what a finding related to a breach may mean. And then also, more importantly, make sure your response addresses our attacker lifecycle. In some of these cases, we were talking about kind of very surface-related breaches, again, ransomware incidents. But from the one with the domain controller, where we saw a domain controller compromise and the response was very, very, very understated, think about what the indicator may be telling you. What did my team detect? What is that telling me about where someone may be with regards to inside my environment? So great takeaways. And Lance, thank you for that addition. It's very important to use these different types of opportunities to, again, focus on where can I make my humans stronger, my team of humans. Most importantly, after responding to an incident, you should also then be monitoring for reentry. Getting an attacker out of a network, if they want to get back in, they are going to do their best to try to get back in. I've worked on multiple engagements with multiple organizations where we've gone through a remediation or a response event. And it's going to sound a little weird, but the best evidence we get is the next day the attackers are trying their hardest to break back in. That's a good sign of a good response. You've actually gotten someone out. Think about it. I usually compare these things to a burglar, to a house, someone trying to break into a house. Someone has broken into your house. You change all your locks, replace your windows, put bars up, put in security cameras, whatever you may have to do. And the next day, they're trying to get back in because they want to crumple what they've got, and they have trouble getting back in. Number one, it means they didn't leave anything behind. Number two, they may not have necessarily gotten what they wanted the first time. And number three, they're having a heck of a time get back in, which means your team is in a very, very good spot to continue protecting the network. All right. Last but not least, I also wanted to focus on third-party accounts. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, third-party account doesn't sound like a human element. But in fact, our attackers utilize third-party accounts in more cases than you'd think. And they do it for one simple reason. As humans, we trust third-party accounts. Let's talk a little bit about what these are for folks who may not be in the InfoSec realm, may not be in the account management realm. They are often accounts that are set up by organizations to allow third-party vendors access to their products. A very simple form. You have a, well, I like to use the example of HVAC in this case. We won't talk about a breach related to an HVAC vendor, but think about an organization or building that has air conditioning, heating, all those different types of services that you need for a basic office. You are most likely not going to employ your own internal HVAC team. You're going to hire an HVAC team. That is a set of humans that you trust to come in and repair your AC, repair your heating when needs be. Think of a third-party account management the same way if you haven't run into this before. You have different types of appliances inside of your network, phones, network devices, POS terminals, all different types of technology. You can use a vendor to come in and manage these for you. They perform updates. They troubleshoot any issues. These accounts often, in most cases, require things like change tickets and are only activated when vendor requests. However, unfortunately, we see a lot of humans put in an element of trust and say, this is a third-party vendor. This vendor needs my business. This vendor would not hurt me. Therefore, I can trust this account. The permissions often depend on initial requests. The account is set up once, and then it is most likely forgotten about. Because if the vendor isn't complaining, it's not an account I need to necessarily focus on. I'm on an InfoSec team. I'm way too busy to focus on these different vendor accounts. Your attackers are banking on that. Case study in this case, Hospitality industry, very, very large organization with over 400 properties in 4 countries, nothing small whatsoever. Their InfoSec capabilities, again, very capable, very aware team. They were able to quickly respond to alerts. They had deployed two-factor authentication. That's like the golden ticket of security advice. If you don't have it, deploy two-factor. They had two-factor deployed. However, they only had it deployed on internal accounts. IT accounts went a next step, and it required biometrics as well, but they seemed like they were in the right place. If you took a look at their network from a high level, you would say to yourself, this looks fairly secure. You're responding within minutes. You're remediating within hours. You've got two-factor in place. The only gap, third-party vendor accounts were still single-factor. Humans trusted the accounts. Not only that, but when they reached out to some of the vendors and said, we'd like to employ two-factor authentication, the vendors responded and said, you don't need it. You can trust us. We're your vendors. We're here to work for you. Don't think about that. They automatically fell into the trust category and were never monitored. The often assumption I get from a lot of my clients as well about vendor accounts, I don't know what they're doing anyways, but I know that they need it, and I know they didn't want to submit for two-factor when we had it. The reality in this case, the two-factor account had been compromised and was used to move around the network, and it was used to install POS ransomware malware over several months, and unfortunately the organization suffered a lot of loss. The reality at surface from the attacker point of view seemed fairly simple. Single-factor account. It was tied to VPN. It was tied to Active Directory. I could use it to move all around the environment. The harsh reality, though, is that the account password had not only not been changed in 2 years, but it was also the same account password that had been used in other breaches as well. This was unfortunately a combination of human problems in this one. We had an account with extreme privileges that was not monitored, was not looked at. From an IR point of view, that unfortunately is often the silver bullet. Not only that, we also had human sharing passwords between the two. And I know we could have spent this entire webcast talking about password security, but it's an important consideration. Dear third-party vendors, if you want access to my environment, if you want to access what my other humans access, then you need to follow under my same human requirements as well. We should be monitoring these accounts as much as we are our most privileged accounts, because not only of their capabilities, but also the fact that we are allowing someone outside the organization access internally. And then once a third party has been given access to your network, make sure that their security is as good as yours. If you have two-factor in your organization, then your vendor has two-factor authentication as well for that account access. If they're not interested in it, yeah, go ahead, Lance.
And it sounds like we need to treat those vendors just like we treat employees from a training perspective. In other words, you said they need to follow our rules, so we need to make sure before they touch that network, they know the rules. So they should be part of the awareness training also. Any vendor that's going to touch our network, we're going to treat like a contractor or an employee. We're going to train you so you know our rules and our expectations.
That's right on the money, Lance, and that's exactly how we solved the problem for this client as well. We said to them, you can't don't let your vendor be your weakest link. They need to be trained just as well. Now, there's going to be a lot of griping in the industry if vendors start having to go through client training, if vendors have to start going through product and customer training. And there's definitely a compromise to be had between those two. But as an organization, again, my InfoSec professionals, your job is to protect the house. So my non-InfoSec people listening to the phone, your job is also to protect the house using your various departments. We can't let a third-party organization be the one that gets in, because we've done everything right in finance and in marketing and in HR and in IT. So we've got to extend the same exact type of training, Lance, nail right on the head. That's an excellent way to phrase it. If you want access to my network, then you've got to meet my minimum requirements. That's a good human standard to set forward, because it helps us keep an eye on potential attack vectors, potential ways for attackers to get in. And with that, that actually brings us to the end of my case study and the end of my events. But Lance, I'd like to hand it over to you to talk a little bit about how we can learn a little bit more about some of these different concepts and InfoSec practices we've discussed.
All right, so Matt, thank you so much. For the forensic folks, we appreciate you joining us. For the security awareness folks, I know some of the topics Matt was talking about was a little bit beyond outside of our box. And that's precisely what I wanted him to do. I wanted us to understand that not only from a human perspective are we working with the non-security folks, but from a human perspective, we need to be working with the security folks also. And also, we can't just focus on the prevention side, but we need to be trained and involved in the incident response, or yeah, the incident response side also, so we can better understand what's going on and how to prevent future threats also. And by the way, following the motto of never let a breach go to waste, some of those incidents, real events, can make great stories internally if you can share, so your employees better understand the why. They can understand why they need to have secure behaviors and the impact those behaviors have. Because employees, in many ways, are an extension of or even part of that security team at a very basic level. All right, so let's go ahead. And Carol, do we have any questions? And before questions, folks, just real quick, you see right here, we've got the, if you want to learn more about the digital forensics, the classes that Matt's teaching or other folks are teaching, we've got the forensics site there. And then what we'll do here for Securing the Human, our next webcast, 29 November, with the pen testing group. We're going to learn how the pen testers are able to, the different methods of social engineering for getting in an organization. Otherwise, Carol, I think we are all done.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have a few questions ready for the Q&A. Our first question is, which web browser do you consider the most secure?
Matt, that's yours.
That's a really good question, and I will phrase it from a forensic perspective. The web browser that you have insight as to what's going on with it. It's hard to recommend one particular type of web browser, only because a lot of web browsers these days rely on third-party plugins, and those third-party plugins are actually what become vulnerable. So I would say don't think of it as I will not get compromised if I use web browser ABC, but I will if I get XYZ. Instead, think about your normal web browser activity, what plugins you've got, what types of sites you're accessing, and how can you defend against those. Some good practices for web browsing are, again, keeping an eye on things like cookies that can not only be used for tracking, but can also be used maliciously as well. And then also script execution as well. Personally, I actually like to take a look and vet every single piece of JavaScript that's going to run when I'm browsing the web, and that actually has helped me avoid dozens of incidents. And that's not that I'm browsing any malicious sites. Again, it's an attacker thinking about normal activity, how can they exploit that, and me putting a block in place to defend that. So again, don't focus so much on the web browser itself, more of how do I browse the internet and how are my third-party plugins potentially exposing me.
And then for the security awareness folks out there, Matt's just reiterating, ultimately it's the behaviors. So there is no best secure browser. It really comes down to how are people using them, their behaviors.
All right, thank you both. How can the attacker spoof the domain?
So Matt, I'll start.
That's a good question.
Well,
go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, so spoofing domains is actually very, very easy. All they do is fire up an email client and then say, I'm going to send an email from, any organization they want. Because when you create an email, when you set up your email client, you set the from domain, and pretty much any type of mail software, any software designed to send out emails to lots of people, lets you customize the from domain. I mean, legitimate marketing software. MailChimp is an example. It's an online cloud service that allows you to send thousands, if not millions, of emails. That's how marketing people craft them. So it's actually very, very simple. It's not like the bad guys are exploiting some advanced technique. Matt, I'll let you jump in.
Yep, no, Lance, again, nail right on the head. It's actually not that complicated of a process. It is very simple. If anyone had gone through that process of setting up an Outlook account or setting up Microsoft Office, it asks you for various bits of information. Your email server, what is your name? What organization do you work for? You can put anything you want in these values. Very similar to sending an email as well. You can control what that looks like. For a brief kind of 10-second technical explanation of, in case the question was asking for a technical, there is the surface of an email, which is 9 times out of 10 what everyone reads. There are also some underlying technical factors of an email as well, and that's when Lance was talking earlier about coming from a legitimate domain, but controlling the reply to address. That actually gets into some of the technicalities of how an email is crafted and you can change any of those values fairly arbitrarily as well. So both sides, it's not that difficult to do. It's just something that, again, technology can help you either detect or trained eyes can help see as well.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, how do you develop an incident response process, learning from your mistakes, meaning learning from don't let a breach go to waste?
That's an excellent question, and I think is definitely one of the focuses of not misestimating an attack. Let me go back to our simple example of ransomware. And again, I really like that quote from Randy by way of Lance about not letting a breach go to waste. Ransomware, for anyone, I'm sure a lot of folks on the call have heard of it or unfortunately may have encountered it. Ransomware usually takes advantage of some sort of vulnerable, again, third-party piece of software or a vulnerable website or a very trusting user via a phishing or a scam email to install a piece of software that then starts to lock down files. In the particular client example I gave, it also hit the file shares. These incidents of ransomware can be very, very prolific. From an incident response point of view, responding to that incident at the surface to your organization, because business continuity is number one, it may be as simple as, again, restoring laptops, restoring things from backup, and going about your day. If you were to put a more detailed IR lens on it, there's a focus on how did they compromise the network. Number one, is there potentially vulnerable software in my environment that we need to fix? That's my IR team working with my SOC, working with my patch management. Number two, if the ransomware propagated throughout network shares, how did that happen? Are my users connecting to network shares that they don't need? Do my users have permission to network shares that they don't need? So from an IR point of view, understanding the scope of your accounts. And then also point number three from the ransomware incident as well, do I have anything in place that could have prevented this from an IR point of view? A lot of organizations these days are looking at things like whitelisting, and I don't want to talk too much about the technology gap because we'd like to focus on the human, but as your IR teams are taking every incident, learning everything they can, look at how the malware, how the piece of attack or whatever happened, look at how it moved throughout your network from every point, from the end to the beginning, as far as you can see, and look for different steps of how you could have better responded to that incident. If you were to cut off the attack at a third-party web browser plugin, how would you have fixed that plugin? If you could have cut off the attack at a file share, how would you have addressed that file share? Walk through each step and have your team look at every single phase, every single milestone, and think about how would we have responded to an incident if it only got this far, and you will very quickly find the weaknesses inside the environment that need to be fixed.
All right, thanks, Matt. I think we have time for one more question. How truly successful are the phishing awareness programs?
Ooh, so I'll jump in on that one. Very successful. It works. Phishing simulations, phishing assessments, things like that, all you're doing is perhaps once a month, every month, sending out phishing emails and then training people. It's a simulation. When they fall victim, boom, it's an amazing teaching moment. On average, I tend to find organizations that have no phishing program or things like that. You send out a basic email, 30 to 40% will fall victim. In a highly trained organization, that will be less than 4%, 5%, 4%. Security professionals always then go, but Lance, 3, 4, 5% fell victim. That's still bad. Actually, no, because once you get in a highly trained organization and you're phishing every month, the vast majority that are falling victim every month, that 3 to 4%, are new hires. So what I tend to find is when you're doing these phishing simulations, people fall victim, but they fall victim once and only once, and it really burns in and they remember it, and as a result are far less likely to ever fall victim again to a real attack, and if they do, they quickly realize it and report it, which is almost as good as prevention. So the whole idea when these people fall victim for the first time, that's actually a good thing because it's a training simulation and it's really burned in their mind. And this is true of any behavior. It just so happens that phishing is a very top behavior that we're concerned about, as Matt started this off with, and this is one of the easier ones to actually measure and train on. So is it effective? Absolutely. That's why so many people are doing it.
All right, well with that we are out of time. Thank you so much, Matt and Lance, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.